Béton Brut. Béton Brut is the French term for raw concrete, and it is the material foundation from which the entire Brutalist movement takes its name. The style was pioneered by the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier in the years after the Second World War, when he began leaving concrete exposed exactly as it emerged from its timber molds, complete with the grain of the wooden boards and the marks and seams of the casting process. His Unité d'habitation in Marseille, completed in 1952, was the landmark that defined the approach, a vast slab of raw concrete raised on massive sculpted supports, housing an entire community with shops and a rooftop terrace built in. Rather than hiding concrete behind plaster or stone, Le Corbusier celebrated its rough texture and structural honesty, treating the imperfections of the surface as the true expression of the material. Neo-Brutalism. Neo-Brutalism was the British movement of the early 1950s that first defined brutalism as a conscious architectural philosophy, rather than merely a way of using concrete. Its central figures were the married architects Alison and Peter Smithson, and the term was popularized by the critic Rayner Banham, who framed it as both an ethic and an aesthetic. The founding building, Hunstanton School in Norfolk, was actually built of exposed steel and brick rather than concrete, which reveals the movement's true concern: absolute honesty of materials and structure. Nothing was to be hidden. Pipes, beams, ducts, and the bare surfaces of construction were all left frankly on display. This idea, sometimes described as an as-found aesthetic, held that a building should show exactly what it was made of and how it was put together, without disguise or decoration. Heroic Brutalism. Heroic Brutalism describes the monumental civic architecture that flourished in the United States and especially in Boston through the 1960s and early 1970s. This was brutalism deployed at the scale of government and public institution, producing bold, weighty, sculptural buildings intended to project permanence, seriousness, and civic authority. The defining monument is Boston City Hall, completed in 1968, an inverted concrete ziggurat whose heavy overhanging upper floors sit atop a brick plaza. The architect Paul Rudolph was the movement's leading American figure, and his art and architecture building at Yale, with its deeply ridged corduroy concrete surfaces, became one of its most influential works. These buildings were expensive, ambitious, and unapologetically imposing, and their reputation has swung sharply between admiration and hostility in the decades since. Sculptural Brutalism. Sculptural Brutalism treats concrete not as a structural necessity, but as a plastic medium to be molded into expressive, dramatic form. Because concrete is poured as a liquid, it can take almost any shape, and architects working in this vein exploited that freedom to create buildings that behave more like enormous abstract sculptures than conventional structures. Marcel Breuer's Whitney Museum in New York, with its stern-stepped facade of granite-clad concrete looming over the street, exemplifies the monumental sculptural approach. In religious architecture, the German architect Gottfried Böhm pushed concrete into soaring, crystalline mountain-like forms, most spectacularly at the Pilgrimage Church of Neviges. The emphasis in this style falls on mass, shadow, and dramatic silhouette, using the sheer sculptural presence of concrete to produce an emotional and almost overwhelming effect. Megastructure Brutalism. Megastructure Brutalism envisioned the building not as a single object, but as an entire, self-contained environment. A vast framework, capable of housing a whole community within one continuous structure. The idea drew on utopian dreams of the 1960s, when architects imagined cities that could grow, adapt, and extend indefinitely within a single monumental armature. The most celebrated realized example is Habitat 67 in Montreal, designed by Moshe Safdie for the World Exposition of 1967, which stacked 354 identical prefabricated concrete boxes into an interlocking three-dimensional village, each unit gaining a private roof terrace from the dwelling above. Megastructures expressed a boundless faith in concrete and prefabrication as tools to reorganize human life at a grand scale. Few were ever completed, but as ambitious experiments, they remain among the most striking products of the brutalist imagination. Soviet Brutalism. Soviet Brutalism refers to the monumental concrete architecture built across the Soviet Union and the wider Eastern Bloc from the 1960s through the 1980s. It combined the raw concrete language of the West with the ideological ambitions of the socialist state, producing buildings of enormous scale and often startling, otherworldly form. Freed in some respects from commercial constraint, architects in the Eastern Bloc created government ministries, research institutes, sanatoriums, and cultural palaces that could be strange, futuristic, and monumental in ways rarely seen elsewhere. The Ministry of Highways in Tbilisi, a stack of horizontal concrete bars interlocked like a game of pickup sticks and lifted high off the hillside, is among the most extraordinary. Alongside these landmarks stood vast estates of prefabricated concrete panel housing, mass-produced to shelter entire populations and now inseparable from the visual memory of the era. Yugoslav Spomenik. The Yugoslav Spomeniks are a group of abstract concrete monuments commissioned by the state of Yugoslavia under Josip Broz Tito, mostly during the 1960s and 1970s, to commemorate the battles and victims of the Second World War. The word Spomenik simply means monument. Though they are memorial sculptures rather than habitable buildings, they belong firmly to the brutalist idiom in their raw concrete construction and monumental scale. What sets them apart is their radical abstraction. Rather than depicting soldiers or figures, sculptors like Bogdan Bogdanovic and Dusan Jamonja created vast futuristic forms of wings, crystals, flowers, and cosmic bursts, deliberately avoiding conventional national or ethnic symbols in favor of a shared forward-looking vision. Scattered across the landscapes of the former Yugoslavia, many now stand abandoned, and their haunting alien beauty has made them the subject of intense fascination among photographers. Brazilian Brutalism. Brazilian Brutalism, often called the Paulista School, after the city of São Paulo, where it flourished, adapted the raw concrete language to the climate, society, and ambitions of mid-century Brazil. Emerging in the 1950s and reaching its height in the 1960s and 1970s, it fused brutalist honesty with a strong social and civic mission, producing buildings that were monumental, yet open and generous to the public. The architect Villanova Artigas gave the movement its manifesto in the São Paulo Architecture School, a single great concrete hall lifted on tapering pillars with no doors at its perimeter, symbolizing an institution open to all. Lina Bobardi's São Paulo Museum of Art suspended an entire concrete-framed glass box high above the ground on bold red beams, freeing the plaza beneath for public life. The style favored elevated volumes, sheltering overhangs, and interiors lit softly from above. Japanese Metabolism. Japanese Metabolism was a radical avant-garde movement launched in Tokyo in 1960, closely tied to brutalism through its love of raw concrete and monumental form, but distinguished by a unique biological philosophy. The Metabolists imagined buildings as living organisms that could grow, adapt, and renew themselves, with permanent cores serving as trunks from which replaceable capsules and modules could be attached and removed like cells. Their guiding figure was Kenzo Tange, and the movement's purest built expression was Kisho Kurokawa's Nakagen Capsule Tower of 1972, a concrete spine studded with 140 tiny prefabricated living pods, each a self-contained apartment that was meant to be swapped out over time. The capsules were never replaced, and the tower was demolished in 2022, but the vision of architecture as an ever-changing organism remains one of the boldest ideas the century produced. Tropical Brutalism. Tropical Brutalism adapted the raw concrete language to the hot and humid climates of South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, transforming a Northern European style into something suited to intense sun and monsoon rain. Because concrete could be molded into deep overhangs, perforated screens, and projecting sunbreakers, it proved remarkably well suited to shading interiors and channeling airflow in tropical conditions. The supreme masterpiece of this current is the National Assembly Building in Dhaka, Bangladesh, designed by the American architect Louis Kahn and completed in 1982. A colossal monument of concrete and marble, pierced by enormous circular and triangular openings that filter the harsh light. Earlier, Le Corbusier had brought his concrete vocabulary to the planned Indian city of Chandigarh, where massive brise-soleil facades and sculptural rooftop forms answered the demands of the subcontinental sun. Brick Brutalism. Brick Brutalism, sometimes called warm brutalism, applied the movement's core principles of structural honesty and raw material expression, while substituting brick for concrete, producing a softer and more tactile version of the style. The approach retained the brutalist commitment to leaving materials frankly exposed and to expressing structure openly, but the warm color and human scale of brick lent these buildings an intimacy that raw concrete often lacked. The Swedish architect Sigurd Lorenz created its most revered example in St. Peter's Church at Klippen, completed in 1966, where dark brick covers the walls, floors, and even the ceiling in an almost unbroken sweep, laid in deliberately rough and irregular courses. Brick brutalism found particular favor in the Nordic countries and Britain, where it offered a way to honor brutalist ideals while responding to local traditions and to the desire for a gentler, more weathering surface. Neo-Brutalism. Neo-Brutalism is the contemporary revival of the style in the 21st century, driven by a renewed appreciation for the honesty, boldness, and sculptural power that made the original movement so compelling. After decades in which brutalist buildings were derided, neglected, and frequently demolished, a new generation of architects, photographers, and enthusiasts rediscovered the beauty of raw concrete, and preservation campaigns began to save threatened landmarks. Contemporary architects have returned to exposed concrete and massive monumental forms, now combined with modern environmental technology and refined construction methods that the original brutalists never possessed. The revival also spread far beyond architecture, lending its name to a stark, raw aesthetic in graphic and web design that strips interfaces back to blunt shapes and unpolished surfaces. In its built form, Neo-Brutalism reflects a growing conviction that the movement's honesty and gravity have enduring value. Thanks for watching. Which architectural style should I break down next? Drop it in the comments and I will make it. Also, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.